Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through the information overload to bring you the core insights you need to get smart fast.
And today, we're tackling a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's about how, in a world that feels, increasingly unpredictable, some companies just manage to absolutely crush it.
While
Triggered.
others, well, they stumble, don't they?
Yeah.
Especially when things get chaotic.
Exactly. So our deep dive today is looking right into that.
Yeah. And we're drawing heavily on this really rigorous research from Jim Collins and Morten Hansen in their book, Great by Choice.
And this wasn't just like a quick look. These guys spent 9 years on this.
9 years, starting way back in 2002.
Right. And think about the timing there. Post 9/11, lots of economic uncertainty. It was a shaky time.
Definitely. And that whole backdrop of, unpredictability, it really fueled their main question.
Which one? Right.
Basically, what really separates the companies that do exceptionally well when everything seems up in the air?
Okay, so how did they even identify these like super successful companies?
Well, they came up with this term, 10Xers.
10Xers?
Yeah. And these weren't just companies doing, a little bit better. They were delivering results at least 10 times greater than their industry average.
10 times.
And not just for a year or two, but over the long haul. Sustained, really extraordinary performance.
That's not just good, that's a whole different category.
Absolutely.
And they kick off with just a mind-blowing example, don't they? Southwest Airlines.
Oh, yeah. The classic.
Just think about the airline industry between, 72 and 2002. It was just constant turmoil.
Complete chaos. You had fuel shocks, deregulation, changing everything.
Strikes, recessions, the Petikio strike, hijackings.
And then, tragically, 9/11. It's honestly amazing any airline survived, let alone thrived.
Right. But Southwest?
Southwest was incredible.
Okay.
Get this. A $10,000 investment in them back in 1972.
Yeah.
By 2002, it would have grown to nearly $12 million.
No way. 12 million.
Yeah, that's 63 times better than the general stock market. Smoked giants like Walmart, Intel, Disney.
That is astonishing, especially in that industry. Okay, so the big question. How did they figure out what made these 10Xers different? Seems like finding a needle in a haystack.
Well, it was a massive research effort, really huge.
Oh, massive.
They did this deep historical analysis comparing matched pairs of companies. So a 10Xer and a direct competitor, often in the same industry, starting around the same time.
Okay, comparing them side by side.
Exactly. Year by year, sometimes even month by month, from when they started right up to 2002.
And what were they looking at?
Everything. They went through over 7,000 historical documents.
7,000.
Yeah. Things like leadership styles, strategy documents, internal memos, company culture stuff, innovation pipelines, how they handled risk,
Yeah.
even trying to quantify the role of luck.
Wow. That's incredibly thorough. And they didn't go in with a theory they were trying to prove.
Right at all. That was crucial. They were really driven by the evidence. They wanted the data to tell the story wherever it led.
Okay, so after all that digging, what was the big takeaway? What's the core difference?
The central idea that emerged is kind of this fascinating paradox.
A paradox.
Yeah. These 10X companies, they seem to embrace two opposing ideas at the same time.
Which are?
On one hand, they deeply accept that the world is uncertain, chaotic, and largely outside their control.
Okay, acknowledging the chaos.
But on the other hand, they have this unwavering belief that they are fully responsible for their own fate, their own outcomes.
Ah, so no blaming the economy or bad luck.
Exactly. They don't make excuses. They take responsibility, good or bad.
That's a powerful mindset. How does that actually, play out in what they do?
Well, the research showed it consistently leads to three core behaviors, distinct patterns of action.
Okay, what are they?
Collins and Hansen called them fanatic discipline, empirical creativity, and productive paranoia.
Fanatic discipline, empirical creativity, productive paranoia.
Okay. And all of this, they found, is sort of fueled by a particular kind of ambition, what they termed level 5 ambition. But let's maybe start with the behaviors.
Yeah, let's dig into those. First one, fanatic discipline. What does that actually look like?
It's about just relentless consistency, sticking to your core values, your goals, your methods, year in and year out.
So just staying the course.
Staying the course with incredible focus, yeah. Even when the market is doing crazy things or when it might seem logical to, chase the latest trend.
They don't get distracted easily.
And none at all. The key thing wasn't always what they were doing, but the sheer unwavering consistency in how they did it. even if outsiders thought it was nuts.
They mentioned that progressive insurance example, right, in the late 90s.
Oh yeah, that's a great illustration of the external chaos. Their stock price jumped, what, 18% in a single day?
Yeah, something huge like that, with basically no news.
Exactly. No big company announcement, no major market shift. It just happened. That's the kind of external craziness 10Xers just don't try to control.
So they focus their energy internally on their own discipline.
Precisely. And you see this so clearly with someone like Herb Kelleher at Southwest.
Right, the legendary CEO.
His focus on Southwest being the absolute best, low-cost, high-spirit airline.
Mm.
They called it monomaniacal.
Ah, intense.
Totally. His work ethic was insane, apparently. And even his public persona, his consistent, sometimes wacky behavior.
A wild turkey, the Elvis outfits.
Yeah, it all served a purpose. Building and reinforcing that unique Southwest culture, day after day, year after year, like an actor staying relentlessly in character.
And he was fiercely competitive, that quote they shared.
Oh, that one's intense. If someone says they're going to smack us in the face, knock them out, stomp them out, boot them in the ditch, cover them over, and move on to the next thing.
Whoa, okay, so that's fanatic discipline, unwavering consistency. Now, empirical creativity, it sounds a bit like an oxymoron.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's really important. It means you still make bold moves. You're still innovative.
Wow.
But those moves aren't based on just gut instinct or
Oh.
what everyone else is doing or some grand theory.
Okay, so based on what then?
Based on direct observation,
Hmm.
practical experiments, and hard evidence. Empirical data.
So like testing things out.
Exactly. Learning by doing, essentially.
Yeah.
It's about relying on real-world results, not just opinions or forecasts.
That story about Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel, dealing with his prostate cancer is just, wow.
Isn't it? Such a powerful example. He didn't just blindly follow the initial doctor's advice.
No, he basically became a medical researcher himself.
He dove deep, reading scientific papers, analyzing the data behind PSA tests. He even sent his own samples to multiple labs to validate the results himself.
While running Intel, that's incredible dedication to data.
Absolutely. He found there was actually a lot of disagreement and uncertainty among the experts about the best course of action.
So he didn't just trust the received wisdom.
No, because the empirical evidence he gathered himself showed things weren't so clear-cut. So he ended up developing his own treatment plan based on his own analysis of the data, betting on his own charts, as he put it.
That really shows the power of relying on evidence, not just assumptions, especially when the stakes are high. Okay, so we have discipline, we have this evidence-based creativity. What about productive paranoia? That one sounds negative.
It sounds negative, maybe a bit stressful, but it's actually incredibly proactive. It's not about being frozen by fear.
Okay.
It's about having this heightened awareness of potential threats, constantly thinking about what could go wrong.
Like a constant what-if scenario.
Playing, yeah. But crucially, it's about channeling that awareness, that anxiety even, into productive action.
Yeah.
Building buffers, having contingency plans, preparing for storms before they hit.
The comparison they draw between Amundsen and Scott heading to the South Pole really makes this clear.
It's a stark contrast, isn't it? Same goal, similar tough conditions, totally different approaches to preparation.
Amundsen was just meticulous.
Obsessively so. Huge supply depots, multiple markers so they couldn't be missed even in bad weather, massive buffers, like 3 tons of supplies for 5 men versus Scott's 1 ton for 17.
Wow, that's a difference.
And bringing 4 thermometers instead of just 1. He was constantly anticipating problems and building in margins of safety.
Whereas Scott, well, he operated much closer to the edge.
Tragically close. Minimal supplies, that single flag marking a key depot. When small things went wrong, like that broken thermometer, the consequences were catastrophic because there was no buffer.
And the research showed they actually faced similar amounts of bad weather initially.
Yeah, the difference wasn't the external conditions they faced, it was the internal preparedness. Amundsen's paranoia led to preparation that made survival possible.
And this applies directly to business.
Absolutely. Think about Bill Gates and Microsoft with OS2 versus Windows.
Right. He publicly backed OS2 for a while.
He did. But his, let's call it productive paranoia, about whether it would really take off, about IBM's control, about other possibilities. It led him to keep investing heavily in Windows development on the side.
Hedging his bets, basically.
Exactly. It wasn't just predicting the future, it was preparing for multiple potential futures. So when Windows unexpectedly gained traction, Microsoft was perfectly positioned to capitalize. That quiet background investment paid off massively.
It's that constant what if, never getting complacent.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And David Breashear's on Everest in '96. Same thing. Even amidst the climb, he's thinking about bottlenecks, weather shifts, the risks posed by so many climbers, needing reserves for mistakes.
That constant vigilance.
That's productive paranoia in action. And think about Southwest post 9/11.
Yeah, they weathered that storm much better than others.
Because of decades of discipline, low costs, strong balance sheet, $1 billion in cash, I think high credit rating, a crisis plan already in place, that strong culture.
So their long-term paranoia-driven discipline built a buffer.
Exactly. It acted like a marvelous prophylactic, as they put it.
Right.
They were prepared for the unexpected, even if they didn't know exactly what form it would take.
Okay, so those are the three core behaviors. Now, they introduced this concept, the 20-mile march. What's that all about?
The 20-mile march is really the embodiment of fanatic discipline applied to performance targets.
Okay, how so?
It's about setting clear, consistent performance markers, could be financial, could be operational, creative output, whatever, and then hitting those markers with relentless discipline year after year.
Regardless of conditions.
Regardless of whether conditions are good or bad, you march your 20 miles every day, rain or shine. No sprinting ahead in good times just because you can, and no stopping or slowing down drastically just because things get tough.
Like that hiker analogy they use. The consistent one wins.
Exactly. The hiker who does a steady 20 miles a day every day will outperform the one who does 40 on sunny days and then 0 on rainy days. It's about sustained effort and self-control over reacting to external conditions.
And the striker example under John Brown is pretty striking here.
Oh, absolutely. He set this law, basically.
Mhm.
20% net income growth every single year.
For how long?
From 1977 to 1998. And they hit it something like over 90% of the time. They even had a snorkel award for units that fell short to keep their heads above water.
Huh. But the fascinating part is they also held back sometimes.
Yes, that's the upper bound of the march. They deliberately constrained themselves not to grow too much faster than 20% in any given year, even if Wall Street wanted more.
Why do that?
To maintain consistency, avoid getting overextended, ensure sustainable progress. It shows incredible internal discipline, resisting external pressure for short-term bursts.
And Southwest, again, fits this with their decades of profitability.
Perfectly. In that incredibly volatile airline industry, being profitable year after year for nearly 3 decades is a stunning 20-mile march, and they were known to leave growth on the table sometimes to protect that profitability.
So a good 20-mile march, it needs to be specific to the company.
Yeah, tailored. It should be measurable, achievable largely through your own efforts, not totally dependent on the market.
And not just financial.
Right. Could be about innovation cycles, customer service metrics, learning goals,
Yeah.
anything core to long-term success.
Yeah.
And the time frame needs to be not too short, not too long. A Goldilocks time frame.
They contrast this with Safeco Insurance, right? Who kind of lost their way.
Exactly. They had a metric like this initially, focusing on their combined ratio and insurance, but they became inconsistent, got distracted by investment gains, lost discipline in their core business, and performance suffered.
And Intel's pursuit of Moore's Law? That's another one.
A classic long-term 20-mile march, doubling transistor density roughly every 2 years, relentless, consistent progress driving the entire industry.
It feels like hitting that march consistently would build a lot of confidence. Like, you prove to yourselves you can perform regardless of conditions.
Huge confidence builder. It reinforces that your success comes from your actions, your discipline, not just external factors. It exerts control in an uncontrollable world.
And it's never too late to start. They mentioned Genentech.
Right. Arthur Levinson came in and instilled that kind of discipline at Genentech, turning a creative but underperforming company into a high performer. You can start the march later.
Okay, next concept. Fire bullets, then cannonballs. This sounds like the how-to for empirical creativity.
That's exactly what it is. It's a practical strategy.
So what are bullets and cannonballs here?
Bullets are low cost, low risk, low distraction tests or experiments. You fire lots of them out to see what actually works, to get real-world feedback.
Testing the waters.
Precisely. Then, only when you have empirical proof, when one of your bullets hits the target and shows real promise, then you concentrate your resources and fire a cannonball.
A big calibrated bet.
A big calibrated bet, exactly. Based on evidence, not hype or guesswork.
So it avoids that whole ready, fire, aim thing?
Completely. Uncalibrated cannonballs, big bets made without prior evidence are super risky. Bullets let you figure out where to aim before committing massive resources.
Amgen's early days seem like a perfect example.
Tex took. They were exploring recombinant DNA tech. They fired bullets at all sorts of things: interferon, vaccines, growth factors, lots of small bets,
Until
until they saw really promising results with EPO, erythropoietin. That bullet hit. So then they focused their resources, fired the calibrated cannonball on EPO, and it became a massive success.
they didn't just bet the farm on one idea up front.
Nope. Contrast that with PSA, the airline, their fly, drive, sleep idea.
Jumping into hotels and rental cars.
Yeah, that was a huge, uncalibrated cannonball. They didn't test it small scale first.
And it didn't work out well.
Lost money consistently. They fired the cannonball without checking their aim with bullets first.
And back to Microsoft keeping Windows development going while also working on OS2.
That Windows development was like firing bullets. As those bullets started hitting the mark as Windows gained traction, that empirical evidence informed their later cannonball decision to really back Windows.
Makes sense.
Okay,
Leading above the death line. This sounds like bringing productive paranoia into risk management.
it is. It's taking that heightened awareness of threats and applying it specifically to managing existential risks.
The death line being...
The point where a risk, if it materializes, could kill or severely cripple the company. 10x leaders consciously build in safety margins to operate well above that line.
They categorize risks, don't they?
Yeah, 3 key types to watch for. Deathline risks, obviously. Then asymmetric risks, where the potential downside is way, way bigger than any possible upside.
Okay.
And uncontrollable risks, things you just can't influence no matter what you do.
The Everest example, again, helps here.
Definitely. Rob Hall pushing past the turnaround time that was taking an unnecessary deathline risk. His limited oxygen supply created a huge asymmetric risk.
Whereas Breshears avoided those.
He maintained safety margins, recognized the uncontrollable risk of the crowd higher up, and made decisions to stay well above his perceived deathline.
How does this look in business? Stryker again?
Yeah, back in the 80s, they recognized the rising threat of healthcare cost containment. They didn't know exactly what would happen, but they started building cash reserves, their oxygen canisters.
Preparing for the unknown.
Right. So when the industry later consolidated, they had the resources. They were above the death line to make a big strategic move, like acquiring Helmetica, adjusting their speed to the pace of events.
And Intel facing that threat from Motorola's chip.
They didn't panic. They had this intense, focused 3-day meeting, analyzed the threat, and developed a response based on their proven principles. No knee-jerk reactions, stayed disciplined.
And Amgen when they were pushing for EPO approval.
The Simi Valley hostages. That shows the other side. When the moment is right after the bullets have hit, you execute the cannonball with total focus and urgency, but from a position of relative safety built over time.
Got it. Okay, next big idea. The SMAC recipe. Catchy name.
SMACE. Specific, methodical, and consistent.
Okay, what is it?
It's basically a company's core operating formula, a set of clear, durable, and consistently applied practices that define how the company works and interacts with its environment.
Like a blueprint for success.
Sort of, yeah. A very specific, actionable blueprint. And the key is consistency.
Southwest again feels like the prime example here. Kelleher's list from 1979.
Absolutely. Fly only 737s, turn around in 15 minutes. Keep it simple. These weren't just suggestions. They were the core, enduring recipe.
And incredibly, it barely changed for like 25 years, despite all the industry chaos.
That's the power of a great SMAC high recipe adhered to with fanatic discipline. And it's not just what you do, it's also what you consciously choose not to do.
The not-to-do list is just as important.
Crucial. For Southwest, don't do interline baggage, don't serve meals, no first class. For Progressive, don't use loss reserves to manage earnings. Microsoft, don't wait for perfect software before shipping.
Intel, don't cut R&D in recessions. Amgen, don't hype results.
Exactly. These constraints are part of the recipe. The key finding isn't just having a recipe, though.
It's sticking to it.
Sticking to it with fanatic discipline, yes. And only changing it carefully, incrementally, based on empirical evidence and productive paranoia. You don't just rip it up and start over lightly.
Progressives sticking to their data-driven pricing. Southwest sticking to their principles.
Those are examples of adherence. And the flip side, they talk about Apple's struggles in the mid-90s.
When they seem to lose their way.
Yeah, lots of inconsistency in leadership, strategy, product focus. They had strayed from a clear recipe. Jobs coming back was largely about restoring a focused, consistent SMAC approach.
Even non-business examples fit, like John Wooden at UCLA.
His incredibly detailed pyramid of success, right down to how to put on socks and tie shoes properly. That shows the level of detail and consistency in a powerful recipe.
So you change the recipe rarely, but when you do, it can be significant, like Intel moving from memory to microprocessors.
Exactly. There was a huge amendment to their recipe, but based on empirical reality, and they kept many other parts of their recipe intact. It's the genius of the A&D, continuity and change.
They compare it to a constitution.
Yeah, concrete rules,
Yeah.
providing consistency, built on what works, but with a process for careful amendment.
Okay, last big concept, return on luck. This is interesting because luck feels, well, lucky, random.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the research acknowledges that luck, both good and bad, happens. It hits everyone.
Huh.
But what separates the 10Xers is their ability to get a much higher return on the luck they encounter.
So it's not about getting more luck.
No. Their analysis, where they actually coded and counted significant luck events for both 10Xers and comparisons, it showed no meaningful difference in the amount of luck.
Really? Same amount of good and bad luck hitting both.
Pretty much, yeah. The difference was in the response, how they played the hand they were dealt.
That climber story, Malcolm Daly.
Such a dramatic illustration.
Yeah.
Yes, it was incredibly lucky his friend happened to fly over in a helicopter just then. Pure chance.
But that wasn't enough.
No. His survival ultimately depended on the actions of his climbing partner who kept him alive and the skill of the pilot who executed the rescue. It highlights that people luck, and crucially, the actions taken after the lucky break.
So how do 10Xers get a better return? What do they do differently?
They recognize luck when it shows up, both good and bad. They seize good luck opportunities with urgency and intensity.
Like Bill Gates seeing that popular electronics article about the Altair?
Exactly. Others saw it, others had the skills. But Gates acted immediately and decisively dropped out of Harvard, moved to Albuquerque, wrote the basic interpreter. He didn't just notice the luck, he pounced on it.
And Amgen hiring Fu Kun Lin from that tiny ad.
The chairman called it a defining moment. Luck. Sure, finding him was lucky, but the return came from recognizing his talent and creating the environment for him to succeed. They amplified the good luck.
So it ties back to the other behaviors. Discipline, paranoia, bullets, and cannonballs.
Absolutely. You need the discipline, like a 20-mile march, to persist long enough for good luck to find you. You need the paranoia to build buffers so bad luck doesn't kill you, leading above the death line. You need the empirical creativity, bullets, to recognize a lucky break when it emerges from an experiment. And you need the decisiveness to fire a cannonball when good luck gives you a clear shot.
They contrast this with companies like AMD, who had lucky breaks but didn't capitalize.
Right. AMD had good luck. A legal win against Intel, a strong chip at one point, but they fumbled the execution. Manufacturing delays, strategic missteps, that's a poor return on good luck. They squandered it.
Like having talent but not putting in the work.
Kind of like that, yeah. Luck gives you an opportunity, but you need the discipline and execution to turn it into a great result. Luck favors the persistent, as they say.
But you can only persist if you survive the bad luck.
Exactly. Which brings us back to productive paranoia and leading above the death line. Building resilience is key.
Like Biomet in the early days, sleeping in the motorhome.
Yeah, running incredibly lean, making extreme sacrifices just to survive until their products took off. That built the resilience to endure bad luck and be ready when good luck eventually arrived.
So the takeaway on luck is...
Luck isn't a strategy. You can't plan for it. But getting a high return on luck is a strategic capability.
Yeah.
It involves recognizing luck, acting decisively, being prepared for bad luck through discipline and paranoia, and leveraging those core 10X behaviors to make the most of whatever fortune, good or bad, comes your way.
Wow. Okay, so bringing this all together, thriving in chaos isn't really about being smarter or more visionary or even luckier, is it?
It seems not. It's more about adopting a specific set of behaviors. That fanatic discipline, the empirical creativity, the productive paranoia.
Guided by things like the 20-mile march for consistency and the SMIC recipe for clarity.
Right. And all those things together allow you to manage risk effectively and get that higher return on luck. It's about building a company that can perform well regardless of the environment.
Not predicting the future, but being built for the future, whatever it holds.
Well put. That's the essence of it.
So for everyone listening, maybe take a second to think about how these ideas might apply to you, whether it's in your job, your business, maybe even just your personal goals.
Yeah, consider those luck events you've faced. The good breaks, the setbacks. Did you get the best possible return on them? Were you prepared?
And maybe think about, what's your 20-mile march? What consistent effort could you commit to, regardless of conditions, to make steady progress even when things feel uncertain?
It's definitely food for thought. And if this deep dive sparked your interest, The book Great by Choice obviously goes into way more detail, lots more stories and data.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.